G'day survivors, this video is all about sound sets in DayZ modding. By the end of this video, you'll be able to do something like this in your own mods. So first of all, what are sound sets? They are simply configuration for playing audio files in the game. It comes in two parts. The first part is the sound shader. This defines the file path of your audio file along with some parameters for playing the file. The second part is your sound sets, which define how these sounds should sound in game, specifically things like sound effects. So today we'll go over the basics of Soundshader Config, Soundset Config, and how to play these sounds in game, loop them, fade them in, fade them out, skip forward and backwards on an audio file, and sync them from the server through things like actions and crafting recipes. So by the end of this video, you should have a pretty comprehensive understanding of the basics of sound sets, how to get them to play, and pretty much anything you'd need to know to get your average sound playing in game. I won't go over absolutely every setting we have for sound files because it's pretty overwhelming, but for the vast majority of mods, you will only need to use the things I'll show you today. And once you have a firm understanding of these basics, you can always go into the vanilla files, look for vanilla examples of what you're trying to do, and read the documentation notes for each function, and you'll figure out what you're trying to do pretty easily once you get your head around the basics. So let's get started. If you haven't watched my CPP file overview for beginners, go and watch that first. That's pretty important, and we'll build on top of all the lessons so far on the channel, including the template mod folder structure we've set up. So go and check them out if you're new to the channel or haven't been following along. First things first, sound shaders. The only thing you really need to define in a sound shader, the bare minimum, is a range in distance meters roughly from the sound source that players can hear the audio file from, and a file path. You can have multiple file paths in a single sound shader if you want to randomize them a little bit. And keep in mind the range isn't 100% accurate because if you are at 35 meters, the sound file might be so quiet that it's basically inaudible anyway. So sometimes you want to double this if you want it to be heard clearly from a certain distance. So if you're going for 35, you might want to set it to 50 or 60 if you really want it to be heard 35 meters away. But you'll need to experiment in game to get these numbers right. Same with volume. Depending on the source file's volume, you might need to tweak this a bit to get it to sound right in game. There are other parameters here that we can work with. Let's have a quick look at a vanilla example. So you can find the vanilla sound effects in DayZ sounds hpp config.cpp. In here are all the vanilla sound config files, and there are a lot of them. There's literally nearly 500,000 lines of code in this file. Most of it is repetitive. So if you're looking for your sound to sound a certain way, a good place to start is the vanilla files and look for something similar to what you're trying to do. You can include these like formulas in your volume settings. I've never played around with these. For example, this is clearly applying some sort of barefoot modifier to the volume equation. I've never played around with that sort of thing, but if you look through the vanilla files, you might figure out ways to do certain things. Here we have a range curve. This is an equalizer range curve. If you're not familiar with what an EQ is, we won't be covering that in today's video because it's quite advanced stuff that you can learn elsewhere and applies to all audio, not just games or DayZ. So here is what's called an equalizer, and we can change which frequencies in the sound effect get boosted or attenuated based on where we set these curve parameters. But I just wanted to mention that if there's something you're trying to do that vanilla has already done, this is a great place to start. What you can do is copy a class that you want to emulate into your config CPP file, rename it to your sound base, change the file path, and then basically all you need to do in your sound set config is set the sound shader array to point to your sound shader base. So if I was using this, I would paste it in there. But for today's lesson, we'll keep things extremely simple, and what we'll do is just play a voice recording file as our sound set example. So here, my example sound shader is inheriting from my base template. This is useful if you need to create multiple sound shader files with the same base parameters. It's completely optional. You could have range down in here and just have this define your entire, and this be your entire sound shader. But it's a good habit if you're reusing code to just create base templates. So we'll inherit from our base template with a range of 35. I'll change the volume to 1.0 for now until we hear it in game and we can tell if it needs to be attenuated or not. So here is where I would define my file path. So if I put my sound file in the data folder, in the sounds folder, and then named it this, then that would be my file path. So let's create one right now. I'll bring up Audacity. This is a free program that you can use in your DayZ mods. It's really easy to use. So I can hit record here. I'm friendly, don't shoot. I'm friendly, don't shoot. That can be our audio file. We'll trim it up a bit, and you can apply effects in here if you wanted to. You could have EQ effects applied and so on. For example, this one makes it sound a bit tinny. I'm friendly, don't shoot. Kind of like a radio setting. You can get real creative here in the sound design part before you import the file into the game. If there's some sort of effect you want to apply, like reverb, things like that, it can be better to apply it in here than to try getting the vanilla sound effects to work. Again, unless there's a specific example you're looking for. And now that we have our sound file ready, we need to export it as an OGG file. So I will export mine into my sounds folder, and I need to call it whatever I've called this here, or vice versa. So your OGG sound file is fine for an example. If you only want to export a subsection of your audio, like if you have a very long audio file that you're trying to split up into different sound shaders, you can highlight the part you want to export and click current selection down here. I don't need to do that. I can go with entire project, which will export everything we have here to a sound file, and we're done. We can close out of Audacity, and our audio file is now in our mod folder. And just quickly before we move on or move forward, I want to mention that if you have an audio file already that you've downloaded from an audio effects website, or for example, I have some songs here that I wrote years ago. This is a WAV file that I just dragged into Audacity, or you can go File, Import Audio. And now I can export this as an OGG file and it will play in game. If I just put a WAV file straight into my mod, it's not going to work. And by the way, when you're packing your mod, make sure OGG files are included in your list of files to copy directly. You can copy my exact list from the video description below. If you don't have it included in here, then it won't get included into your PBO and your audio won't play in game. So now we have an audio file. The next thing to do is set up our Soundset config. So this base sound set is a copy and paste of the vanilla character sound effects, like the voice effects when your character gets injured or is sick and making any kind of sound effect. This is the parameters that are applied to a character's sounds. So we'll leave that as it is for now. I copied this from the vanilla config files as a base template. Our sound set is inheriting from our base template, and we are pointing this sound set to the relevant sound shader. So the sound shader is where we define all of the audio effects that are going to apply to our audio file, and the sound set is where we apply some last minute audio effects, like how the sound should sound in game, if it's spatial or not. Doppler will make it sound different if it's further away. We can say whether it should loop by default and things like that. And just to elaborate here, if it's not spatial, then if you're within range of the audio file, then it will play the same volume no matter how far away you are from it. It's just completely two-dimensional. There's no three-dimensional effects applied to the audio. So if you have some weird issues like that, which I had in the past, make sure spatial is turned on, or you're inheriting from a sound set base which has spatial turned on. Doppler is kind of like the heli crash sound effect. You probably have never noticed in game, but if you pay attention, the heli crash sound effect sounds different from a distance than it does if you're up close. The Doppler effect is the scientific definition for it, but it's basically what makes things sound authentic and natural in a video game when they're further away and moving at speed. Generally speaking, you're not going to want that on, but for something like, for example, in one of my mods, I have a sound effect that plays to warn players that they're nearby AI mission, and it's kind of like a sound effect of gunshots and a voice over a megaphone with some echo, and I turn the Doppler effect on for that sound effect, and it sounds really cool when you're at a distance because it kind of gives it a bit more of a distant sounding sound processing to that audio file. So I encourage you to play around with these to see what they do in game. It's hard to describe. We won't be using these in today's video because they're a bit more advanced. I just want to focus on just playing sounds in game. We can go into a deep dive on sound effects maybe in a future video. So as long as our sound shader array points to a valid sound shader class config, and our class config in our sound shader points to a valid file path, this should play in game. So what we can now do, I have my mission gameplay here. I've already shown you guys how to set up a custom keybind input. We're going to just hijack that to play a sound effect, just to show you on the client how sound effects work. So to start with, let's go with the looping sound effect version. So the first thing we need to do if we're going to loop a sound effect is save a reference to it. If we ever want to stop it, we need to save it as a reference. So we have reference effects sound m underscore for member variable example sound effect. Down here, when our key is pressed, we check if our sound effect reference is not null and it exists, then that means it's playing and looping, so we want to stop it. So this key will toggle the sound effect on or off. So if the sound effect exists, that means it's playing and we need to stop it. When the sound is successfully stopped, this reference will become null, and the next time we press the key, this code will execute and we will create a sound effect sound object or reference in game using the static effect manager, which also works for playing particles, but we'll do that in a separate video. But here we are saying effect manager.play a sound file or sound set on an object. So I can change this flies sound to this name. So if I paste that in there, we are playing this sound set on the player object. We are fading it in by 1 second and fading it out by 1 second, and it is true to looping. So if I hold down Control and hover over this, you can see the parameters there. The final parameter there is a Boolean loop on or off parameter. If we only wanted this to play a single time on the player, we can just omit that because it's false by default, as you can see there. Or we could just simply put false in there. So let's leave ours as true. Now I'll change some of this around so that we can actually see what's happening in game. We'll say stop sound loop and just play sound. Now because my sound file is so short, it's only a second long, having it fade in over a second means we won't even hear it. So let me change this fade in to 0, and I'll change the fade out to 0 as well. If it's a longer sound file, you can increase these numbers. But for now, we'll leave it as that. I'll compile my mod and load up the game. I'm friendly, don't shoot. I'm friendly, don't shoot. I'm friendly. Easy. Now, if we're not looping the file, then we don't have to keep a reference to our sound. We could actually just declare this in the local scope, turn looping off, and that's it. We could play our sound effect. You could even just play it like this and not have auto destroy. But it's a good practice to set auto destroy to true, because this sets whether the effect automatically cleans up itself when it stops in terms of memory management. So auto destroy is false by default. So it's a good practice to get into setting it to true, unless you really don't want it to auto destroy. But most effects, especially audio effects, should probably have this turned on. So that's it for looping. Really simple. Like I said, if you don't want it to loop, but you still want it to play on an object, this could be any object, by the way. This doesn't need to be the player. It could be an item base. It could be an object in-game, an action object, any entity, really. For now, let's comment out this code, and I'll show you how to play a single sound effect, and we'll play it at a position instead of on an object. So if you want the sound effect to play on an object, you use play sound on object. If you want it to just play a sound at a position, you can use play sound. It takes exactly the same parameters. Sound set, instead of an object, it's a vector position, and then we have a fade in, fade out, and loop. If I compile this code, we'll now be playing the fly sound set. This is the dead player sound at our current position when we hit our key, and it will keep playing on that position as a loop. So let's jump in game and see what that looks like. And I'm also setting the volume to 10. So this will probably be pretty loud in game. So let's test it out. That's not that loud. So now the sound is playing where we were just standing, and if I leave the building here, you notice the sound doesn't follow us. And it will keep playing where we set the position, keep looping. Again, like I said, if you don't want it to loop, then just leave that last parameter off or set it to false. And that's it. It's pretty simple to play sound effects. The complexity comes in when we're syncing sound effects from the server to the client during actions like deploying an object or sending RPC calls, remote procedure calls, or in crafting recipes. So here's where things get complicated. This is playing a sound effect on the client, right? Only we can hear this. Other players can't hear this because we're only playing it in our mission base on the client side when we hit a keybind. If we want the sound effect to sync to other players, we need to set up some net code to tell the game to sync when to play and what sound file to play. So a fantastic example template of this for you guys to study would be my music mod. It's open source and it has some pretty advanced, well not advanced, but pretty interesting code for syncing music to the client for all players in the network bubble around a object playing the music, and also skipping the audio ahead so that everyone hears almost as close as possible the same audio. So for example, someone hits play on a boombox or in their car on a music cassette, and the song plays and it's 1 minute into the song, and then their buddy logs in nearby. When their buddy logs in, we can't, or we shouldn't just have the music file or object start playing the music file from the beginning. Otherwise, both players are hearing totally different parts of the song. So what my music mod does is it syncs to the client how far the song has been playing, or how long it's been playing for, the song duration, and tells the client when it starts playing the song to skip ahead to where everyone else has been listening to. So the server governs the audio play point and the clients all sync to it. I won't show you how to do that in today's video because it's really, this video is going to be long enough. But if you want to check that out, go to my GitHub. If you go to Zenarchist.com, it'll redirect to my Buy Me a Coffee page. If you come down here, the first link here is my GitHub. If you come to GitHub, go to code or Zenarchist code, repositories, and look for my music mod. And in music base is a ton of code, all to do with audio files. So if we come into entities, we'll go into vehicles and car script. Here we have music play seconds. This is a NetSync variable, an integer NetSync variable that increments every second. So when a player logs in or a car drives up to a player into their network bubble, the game will set the start offset of seconds or percentage. This is where it gets complicated. The start offset is actually a percentage of the file. And so we need to convert how many seconds have currently played by the total duration of the song and tell the client to play this. Now on the server side, there is no code for playing effects, for sound effects or visual effects, particle effects. So all this syncing needs to happen on the client side, and the server needs to simulate the music playing by incrementing the duration by 1 second using a timer. This is all quite advanced stuff that we'll get into in future videos. I use a timer that triggers every second or every 5 seconds or whatever, and tells all nearby clients how far along the music file should be currently, and then that syncs to all players and skips ahead on the audio file. To do that, I needed to create a custom function to expose the abstract wave. We're getting real advanced now for a beginner guide. So we'll cover this stuff in a future deeper dive into audio files. Maybe I'll break down the source code to my music mod and explain what's going on in some of these bits of code. For now, let's just stick to very simple basic stuff. What we'll do is we'll create an example action. When we use a tool in that action and that action completes, here on finish progress, we will tell all clients that are nearby to trigger a sound effect, so all players hear the same sound effect play on the tool that's being used to trigger this action. So for example, if you're using a tool to dismantle a storage object, you know what I think I'll do? I will create an action that dismantles a barrel. So what we'll do is action example will take a condition target that is non-ruined, And we can say here, barrel color base, barrel equals barrel color base dot cast target dot get object. If not barrel, return false, otherwise return true. So this should target regular barrels for this action now. So I'll do a deep dive on actions in their own video and how to set up your own custom actions. For now, let's focus on the sound set syncing. It's really hard to explain everything in one single video, so we'll just build on each lesson, right? So for now, this is all we need to know. We're targeting barrels. If the target object is a barrel, the action can continue or be applied. And in onFinish progress, send template functions dot debug message dismantle barrel. Let's see if this works first of all. If this template works, what we'll do next is delete the barrel at the end of the action and play a sound effect on the tool that was used to dismantle the barrel. All right, I just tested it and it works, so we have some code to start building on. Okay, so let's do a couple of things here. Let's, while the action is playing, loop a sound effect, and then when the action is complete, we'll delete the barrel and play a sound effect on the tool as well. So I've got some example code here. We'll do this directly on the screwdriver, but this could be on any item really. This process applies to any item. I'll show you how to send a sound effect using an RPC and also using a NetSync variable. So let's just create a static const int here called, we'll just call it zen underscore action loop equals 10103030. Just make it some random unique number. And actually I'll simplify this completely. We'll say if RPC type equals our action loop, then do all of this. Right. So what we're doing is RPC stands for remote procedure call, and it is a way to send over the network instructions to the client or from the client back to the server. In this case, we are sending from the server to the screwdriver, telling the screwdriver to play this sound effect at our position. Now we could also play sound on object. We come to play sound on object. We have the sound set and then the object. So here would be our first parameter, and we'll just say this. And ideally we'd set this up as a loop, and we would trigger the sound effect loop playing when the action begins and stop it when the action stops. So I'm going to copy some template code I have from a different mod, and here it is. And you know what? I think we can actually modify this to play the loop when the action begins and then stop the loop when the action ends. So what we'll do, when we're sending a parameter through RPC, we can use param1 up to something like 8 or 9 or something like that. And so what I can do is say param2. So we're sending two parameters. The first is a string, the second is a bool. So string bool, and we are going to read this data from the server. The server is going to send this information to the client. And what we'll do is we'll say if p.param2, p is our param construct. Param2 will be the second parameter in this list. So that's going to be a boolean. So if this bool is true, then we want to start playing the sound effect. So what I'll do, remember, if we're going to loop, we need to have a ref to the sound effect. So we can name this whatever we want. I'll leave it as example sound effect. So I'll rename this to that. Cut this and put it into our scope of the if statement. We'll say play param1, which is our string sound set name, on this object with a 0 and 0 fade in and fade out, and true for looping. So we want this sound effect to loop. Then we'll say else, if param2 is not true, then we want to stop the sound effect. So now we can say if the sound effect exists, then example sound effect dot stop. Is that what we are supposed to do, or we're just supposed to do sound stop? There we go. So I'll show you what this looks like on our action. Here is some template code I have. So here we have send sound play. We'll put a bool in here for loop. And so when the action begins, we want to start the loop. When the action ends, it's either cancelled or it just simply is completed. Then we can send the command to stop the sound set. So here I'm using if-def server. We could also add server on the end of these if we wanted to. I'll leave things as they are to keep things really simple. We only want to send the RPC from the server, so make sure that the server is the one sending this. That's why this template functions is handy, because it will tell you, this debug message will print on the client as well if this code gets called on the client. This will display a debug message in-game with a client or server tag before the text based on where the code is being executed. So here we can say play sound loop. We can change this to say screwdriver tool, and I'll change this to say tool, and I can refactor my code here to say screwdriver tool equals screwdriver dot cast action data dot m main item, if not tool return. And actually, you know what would be easier is to cut this down into here and change this back to action data. We need to change this to match what the RPC is expecting. So on our screwdriver, we need to send an RPC ID. So that'll be this. And we can change this to say sound params and pass that in there. We need to make sure the structure of the parameters match what the client is expecting. And this is where we pass in our parameters. So here I can say loop. And so what's going to happen here is when our action begins, we start the animation loop. We call this function with our action data. The action data will check, is the item we are using a screwdriver? If it's not a screwdriver, we won't do anything, we'll stop. If it is a screwdriver, then we will send to the screwdriver these parameters using the RPC call. And this says RPC single param. It doesn't mean single parameter like that, it means a single parameter object. So I know this is all a bit confusing. Don't worry, it'll become second nature the more you practice with this stuff. So let's test this to begin with. This is going to play the pickaxe sound effect on the screwdriver when our action begins, and it will stop looping when the action stops. That's the expected behavior. Let's see if I've screwed this up and if it works or not. So let's compile our mod, see if I've made any mistakes. I probably have. And yep, I've missed something. Screwdriver 20. I don't think we need to initialize the parameter here. And it's a good habit to get into naming your objects something that's easy to read by the human eye. This is something I haven't been great at in the past, but I'm getting better at. So I'll rename this params so we know it's a list of parameters. And let's see if this will compile now. So what this ctx.read does is it tries to read what the server has sent it. If it succeeds, this check will pass and this code will execute. If it fails, we'll stop here. And we really should put an error message in here, but again, this video is already going to be way too long if I keep expanding on this code base too much. Let's focus on the absolute basics. And I forgot to rename this, so let's copy that over. And here we go. Okay, that's all the mistakes I'd made. So let's test that this works. Boot up my game and start performing the action. Now, depending on the action you are doing, you might need to change these functions for this sort of application. For a continuous action base, it's usually an animated base, so we're overriding the correct animation functions. If you're overriding an instant action, it'll be different. You might need to override just on start. And these are things you'll learn through experience and by studying the vanilla files. And when I do an actions deep dive, we'll go over a lot of that information in detail. So here's our actions. We have a screwdriver in hand. We can either craft a fire barrel or perform our example action. Let's try that. And there's our sound effect looping. Perfect. Let's see if it stops when we take our finger off the mouse. Perfect. Awesome. All right. So we're halfway there. And I should change this to say play sound loop so that we know if it's starting or stopping. All right. Now all that's left to do is delete the barrel and play a sound effect. We can play a sound effect on the barrel itself, but if we're deleting the barrel, I find it's probably better to play it on the tool itself, just in case the barrel is deleted and the sound effect tries to play on a deleted object and we don't hear it. Let's do it here in the item base. So what we'll do is define a new boolean. We'll call this bool underscore zen should play sound. The reason I put Zen in front of everything when I'm declaring variables and functions is in case a different mod has this same function name. If two mods have the same variable name or function name or class name, they won't be compatible with each other. So I like to add a little prefix in here just to make sure that all my functions and variables are unique. So now what we need to do is let's open up Screwdriver and Toolbase, Item Base. And what I'm looking for is register NetSync variables. This is what we're looking for. So this all happens in init item variables. So I can copy this into my mod. So we'll go to my Screwdriver, and at the top here, we will register NetSync. And there are a few ways we can go about this. We can register floats, integers, Boolean values, and for this particular case, we actually want to use bool signal. What bool signal will do, if I bring up the vanilla files here, when the bool variable is true, it's sent to clients and becomes false again. So the game will automatically turn this back to false after it's sent to all the clients. It's a signal to trigger something. So that's the best use case for what we're trying to do. So in Screwdriver, I'll copy this in. This needs to be the name of our variable. So it should play sound. So what we can do here is say void zen play sound. We can set this to true and set sync dirty. This forces the game to update any registered NetSync variables. This should only really run on the server. So ideally I should probably have some sort of check in here that it's not client that's calling this, but I won't bother with that today because it's already getting long with this video. So what we'll do is just make sure we only play this in the on finished progress server. So here we can say Screwdriver tool equals screwdriver dot cast action data dot m main item. If it's not a screwdriver that's being used, we can stop here. If it is a screwdriver, here's where we tell the tool to play our sound. So now if we go to Screwdriver, what we need to do is now check for on variables synchronized. So let's override that into Screwdriver. Always call super on this function or you'll have all kinds of problems. This is where the game updates the item on the client based on what the server is telling it to do. So here we could say, we can do it directly in the on variable synchronized. I think it's best to extract your calls out of here. So we can say check zen play sound on client. We can create a new function here. And in this function, we can check if this is true, then we want to play our sound on the screwdriver. So remember, our action sound is a sound loop. This new sound we're going to play is a one-off sound effect. So I can copy that code here, turn looping off, or just get rid of all of this since that's the default values anyway. I can say effect sound single sound equals play sound on object, and we can set auto destroy to true. And now for our sound set, because you can't net sync text or strings, so we need to hard code this on the client. So a best practice for this would be to have another static const string zen action sound set equals, and then let's just use our example voice sound effect here. This isn't gonna sound very good, but hopefully you'll get the idea. This is just template code, and we can paste that into here. So this will play a single sound without looping on this object and auto destroy it. All right, now this should be all we need in order to trigger this sound effect to play. So let's look at our action again. When the progress finishes on the action on the server side, we will dismantle the barrel. If we're using a screwdriver, we'll trigger the sound to play by setting this variable to true and forcing the game to sync that information to all clients in the network bubble by setting set sync dirty. This has been registered on the client and server as a variable that should be synced to all clients. It is a signal boolean, so as soon as it has been synced, it will be set back to false. And so now when we compile our mod, if I haven't made any mistakes, when we load in and dismantle the barrel, we should delete the barrel and play a sound effect on the screwdriver. Whoops, and I forgot here that our action target, we need to get object in the action target. The action target is actually information about the action target, not the target itself. And this isn't going to work either. What we need to do here is convert barrel color base barrel equals barrel color base.cast, and we'll put that in there, and we can check if not barrel return. I'll pull this down here, and here is somewhere where we could say you know, if the barrel has items in it, we can drop them all on the ground or something like that before we delete it. But we'll leave it as it is for now. We'll just delete the barrel. We should also check if it's empty first before we even dismantle it. This is very bare bones stuff just to demonstrate sending sounds to clients. All right, that's compiling fine. Let's boot up the game and see if our NetSync code works. All right, here we go. Example action. I'm friendly, don't shoot. Perfect. Alright, obviously you would replace these sound sets with ones that suit your mod, but that's it really for action syncing. It's a very rough template. There's a lot of things you should do better here, a lot of different checks we should do, but obviously this is not a real action, it's just an example. The main thing to focus on is the RPC stuff and the NetSync variable stuff. And this applies to any entity, animals, objects, any entity AI. It doesn't apply to, you can't NetSync variables on static objects. You'll need to use RPCs for that. And that's why I included two examples here. You can also look at the artillery code if you want to see an example of how vanilla uses global classes to send artillery RPCs. You can see here that it's sending a null RPC to tell all clients what sound set to play when the artillery fires. That's a good example of vanilla code for using RPCs to play a sound to all clients in the game. The final thing I want to go over is the playing crafting sounds. So let's have a quick look at the vanilla files. Here they are, insert ingredients, open bean can. So here I've got an example recipe of making or crafting a barrel out of nails and metal plates. 60 nails and 5 metal plates or sheet metal will make a green barrel, just pure example. When we insert our ingredient, we can also insert a sound set here. Now this isn't really a sound set, it's actually a sound table. If I search the vanilla files for this in the CPP files, you'll see that it's actually a bit different. So open bean can, here's the sound set, but what we're actually sending is this here, this category from the config actions sound tables. So you can copy the vanilla config for this if you want to add your own crafting sounds. For example, I have a whole mod that adds some custom crafting sounds, like when you're sharpening your knife, it will play the sound effect of a knife sharpening. So go and check this mod out if you're interested in adding custom crafting sounds. If I go to my config CPP file, you can see that I had to add my own craft lookup table with my own custom configs here. So this is a whole video in and of itself potentially, so go and check out the source code to this file if you're interested in adding custom crafting sound effects. But this is how you do it. If you've already got a sound effect set up, or you just want to use a vanilla one for your recipes, look up the vanilla sounds HPP file, look for craft lookup table, and just look through here for one that suits your mod's crafting recipes, and you can just insert them in your ingredients as another parameter. So now if I compile my code and we craft a barrel out of some nails and metal plate, we should hear the opening can sound effect play while we do that action. Oh, and I forgot to change this to insert ingredient X. So insert ingredient doesn't allow you to specify the sound effect, it just has a blank sound effect. Insert ingredient X allows you to add in a sound effect. You can also add in a crafting animation now. This is new to DayZ 1.28, I believe. As of recording this is new. So this is a whole thing we can play around with in future videos as well. But for now, let's focus on sounds. Let's get this compiling, and let's spawn in what we need. Now it says craft old photo there. That's a string table example that I haven't changed. If we go into language core, this is just to demonstrate how string tables work. It's actually going to craft a barrel, and let's listen. There we go. Perfect. One last thing I want to mention before we wrap up is if you need to add zombie attraction to your sounds, there's an extra step you need to take. So everything we've covered so far has been about playing audio files. Just because an audio file plays doesn't mean zombies or animals will be spooked by it or attracted to it. To add that effect, we need to implement what is called a noise. So we have a sound, which is an audio file, and a noise, which is nothing to do with the audio at all. It's just a way to tell the game to attract AI to this spot that the audio file is playing at. You don't even need an audio file. You can attract zombies with this noise even without audio. So they're two separate systems. So what I've done is I've just searched the vanilla files for noise. I'm looking at the tools category because that's the most relevant for us right now. You can see here we have noise alarm clock and noise kitchen timer. If I open this file up and we scroll down, you can see this class here, class noise alarm clock with a strength of 200 and a type sound. What we can do is copy this into our config CPP file. Now we could have this within the item itself as a config class, or we can just have it in the sound set. So for example, here we have our sound set that we're playing. I'm just going to add mine in here. Doesn't matter what you call this. So I'll call mine, let's call it noise AI. So it's very obvious what this is for. So the next thing I'll do is search the vanilla files for noise alarm clock and open that up. Now this is what we need to copy out of the vanilla files. So I need to copy the noise params and noise system variables into my screwdriver or whatever item I'm playing these noises on. So we'll copy that over. We can also copy this init function. So what we're doing here is when the screwdriver initializes, we are going to set up a static noise system. Static means this will be shared across all instances of a screwdriver. And this is all fine except for the load from path. We need to change this to match our config path. So ours will be config soundsets, and we can put in our example soundset in here, and the noise will be noise AI. So that will load the noise system when the item initializes. Now we need to actually play the noise. So if we go to alarm clock and we'll search for noise system. Down here under the update, this is called every second, I'm thinking, or however long update tick is. And every second it adds a noise target to the current position with our noise parameters. It also has this extra parameter here to reduce the noise based on the current weather. Like if it's in the middle of a storm, it will be less noisy, so to speak. So what we can do is just copy this, come to our screwdriver, and what we'll do is when we have Zen play sound, remember this is triggering only on the server, and so do noises. So noises are a server-side feature or function. So I can paste that in there. And update tick rate is if we hold down Control and click on this, this is the lifetime of the noise. So this will make a noise at that position which the AI will quote unquote see for the duration of lifetime. So it sort of aggroes them to this point. You can also add a noise to an entity itself, but we'll just keep it on the position for now. So this is all fine. Update tick rate doesn't exist in screwdriver, so we'll just make this 5 seconds. So this noise will exist for 5 seconds after the player dismantles a barrel. If there are any zombies nearby, they'll come running to the barrel. Oh, and I just realized init is actually native to clock base. So screwdriver doesn't have an init, so we can just pull this code out of there and throw it in our init item variables. That's fine. So I can compile the mod, make sure it runs. What I'll do is set myself invisible so zombies can't see me, and I'll spawn a zombie in, and we'll see how it reacts when we dismantle the barrel. Oops, wrong action. I'm friendly, don't shoot. There we go, it's coming running. So that's it for today's video. It's a lot of information, I know. We've only just covered the basics here, but hopefully it's enough to get you guys started playing around with sound sets and sound files if you've never done it before. Now, at the start of the video, I showed you guys how I recorded one of my own sound effects for my sleeping mod, the sound of zipping up a sleeping bag and deploying a sleeping bag. To do that, I simply used it's called a Zoom recorder. I used the cheaper one of this, which I think is this one, the H1N. Yeah, this is my one. It's not super cheap. This is in Australian dollars, but it's pretty fun. It's 100% worth it if you are into sound design and want to record your own sounds, this tool is a fantastic starting point. You can obviously use any microphone, but if you want good quality Foley sounds, this is a good start. I learned about this in university when I was a sound engineer, audio engineer during my music production days, and it's really fun to play with. I had a lot of fun recording some of the sounds in my crafting sound effect mod, and I highly recommend getting your hands on one if you are so inclined. And if you do have one, it just has a little SD card. You record your audio files, you import them into Audacity, export them as OGG files once you've trimmed them up, and everything else I've just shown you is the same process, except that your audio file will be one you made yourself, which is pretty satisfying. With that said, hope you guys found this interesting. Thanks for watching. Love you. Take care. Only shoot first if they look unfriendly or you need their stuff.